Hi folks, welcome to another section of Cretacea Park Alpha Build. So I did a little preliminary terrain shaping for this build, and now I'm beginning the build with setting up the entry to the building, a little bit of architectural drama, taking advantage of the scaling features in the game. Um, Currently positioning it so that it will work with the intended branching of the paths. So basically, guests will come into the zoo and see the entrance plaza, come through that, possibly go to the theater, and then take the bridge out across the fen, and they will come to this building where they will encounter a couple of small animals and a little bit of education regarding uh, dinosaurs and their rise to power in a biological sense. um, and from this point on the far side of the fen from the entrance plaza, the paths will diverge and they can either go to the period that the sample animals are from or proceed toward the end of the park, the end of the Cretaceous, or the beginning of the park, the Triassic period. Uh, Again, no animals for that yet in Alpha, on the latter anyway. Obviously, we have the end since we have Tyrannosaurus Rex. And so 4 paths basically out of here to spread the crowds across the park. So this building is intended to take advantage of some of the special features in Prehistoric Kingdom on the building, such as the sloped walls and such. Um, I'm doing a lot of fussing trying to line it up where I want it. Um, this is a smaller version of something I tried earlier in the pre-alpha. Um, Smaller seemed to make more sense for the fact that the animals here will be small and they're just not going to be terribly impressive in the long run when you have things coming like Argentinosaurus or Tyrannosaurus. So we just did a jump because I was having some trouble with the recording. And you can see there's an aviary in here. The second part of this build is the small endings of the dinosaurs as well, since they're still with us as birds. And this will have several implied habitats, since as far as I'm aware, the devs are not planning on doing any avian dinosaurs, uh, at least not till quite a bit later, and even then they won't be the small ones, which I would envision being in this building to emphasize the starting small and ending small. Uh, so this structure also has an area in the back for the keeper of these animals, at least the bird part animals. And I'm debating whether I should come back in for the mini aviary and take out the screens and replace them with glass uh, or perhaps another kind of screen. Um, but I'm kind of like the idea of leaving the top of the mini aviary up and open with the screening to let the more natural weather in for our resurrected animal that would be in there. Um, and I haven't made a final decision yet. Uh, the glass panels I'm playing with at that point, or I was just playing with, where would be where people exit from the building after looking at the dinosaurs. You can see I'm now playing with some of the interior work, uh, giving it something other than the cold concrete. And that is seems to make sense to me. I'm doing a lot of this building off the cuff, making up some of the details as I go along. And one of the reasons that a couple of these videos take a jump is because I would start thinking about how to um, build off what I had, and then I'd jump into it without restarting the recorder. So, oops. Anyway, so again, there'll be another exit from the building at this end for anyone who wants to go through and get to the story of why dinosaurs are birds and why we still have dinosaurs among us. Um, and that will join the other path that comes out of the building just after the place where you can look into the habitats of the dinosaurs that will be part of this building. So um, this is going to be a rather long build. As you can see, it's got a number of intricacies to it. And then there's all the vegetation, and that will probably be a second video. I'm doing things like putting mulch in for the bottom of the implied bird habitats, uh, using the scaling tool to minimize the number of pieces that I'm using for this. So duplicating things, sliding them over saves work, and certainly doing that here. Because guests can walk on modular things, rather than trying to make the paths work in this building, I'm going to be using the flat pieces from the modular building to create a floor in the building and the paths out of the building, which should mean that the guests can wander about within the building without having to follow a strict path, particularly in the front section. And that's a good use of this as far as I'm concerned. It's going to be interesting to see if the barriers will keep them out of a couple of the places where it overlaps. So just taking a look, making sure the overall proportions are working out. And there's a couple of hints there as to the nature of the animals that will eventually end up in here when they are introduced to the game. Um, so at this point, I'm putting a roof on the main section, mostly paying attention to what it will look like from the inside in the choice of piece. Uh, because I intend this building to have a living roof, much like the entrance building has in Cretacea Park. And there will be a skylight, uh, and yet again taking advantage of the fact that these things can be scaled by using something that's really twice as big as the hole in terms of width, and then making the decision to flatten it down a little bit so it doesn't really show above the roof line where the plants will be, so the guests won't see that. And now I'm going through a procedure to minimize the amount of mulch pieces on this roof, and it's going to be 4. Which is a heck of a lot better than the last two game I played. Um, and I'm, spoilers here, I'll be back fiddling with this a little bit because I missed the fact that they're sticking out in one place. So I wanted to do something a little bit more with the entrance. That curved wall is something I developed during my Prehistoric Kingdom game work in Planet Zoo, where I was building prehistoric parks without the prehistoric animals. but getting an idea of some of the concepts I wanted to use uh, when I finally did get my hands on some dinosaurs. Uh, so besides making this look a little bit more like a formal entrance, this structure is helping hide some of the infelicitous blendings of that curved wall and the more rectangular main building. And I change my minds periodically and go back and fix things. They don't always get recorded. Putting glass in for implied bird habitats and a door for the keeper area, all part of finishing a building. Uh, as you can see, the door doesn't really fit in the door space, so I'm going to tweak the door rather than fuss with a bunch of pieces to make a frame around it, giving it a more sleek look on the interior of the building there. So, I see keepers emerging from there and then coming out to go into the habitat door. So if I do glass it in, I'll have to put in a habitat door as well. There was a little bit of raw ground showing there. So using a column set on its side and really stretched out to make a curb. And having done that, I'm going to put curbs on the other two implied bird habitats, which also will help tie it in, assuming I leave the screen there, with the mini aviary, which has a concrete curb around the bottom. So fiddling around with it to get a look I like, and when I got the curve where I wanted to duplicate it, run it over, stutter on the tool, and I get two pieces. Got to make one go away. So taking a look around, seeing how I think it looks. Got to fill that hole somehow. So we'll throw in some more concrete pieces and pull the wood sheathing to make it look intentional. Just get it proud of the surface there. And throw in a couple of perching trees for the non-existent birds. And I'll probably come back later and put some more uh, vegetation and other decorations in these things. Um, but at this point of the build, I just want to convey the general idea. You'll know the mini aviary, I haven't dressed it out either. So checking things, finding things like the gap here. So slide the wall down and then widen the sloped panel to sit it in, and of course have to do the same thing on the other side because it's a very symmetrical building. Uh, at this point I was thinking it was coming along pretty well. Still obviously a lot of work to be done on it. The last bit in this sequence is working on the back area, which would be keeper area, and a little bit of tweaking of the mulch on the roof. So for the keeper area, I wanted to have windows for the keepers to have some natural light come into the area, and decided to do it as a spread of windows. And because this is the outside, I think I should have a frame around the door that's going in. So I'm going to use that trick of using the window to provide its framework. Bring the door in and then size that window to the frame. It was giving me a little trouble by duplications that were unintended. But I get the building in place and then decide to move and size the windows a little bit to get it a little better proportioned for the size of that piece of the building. Going to give it a canopy over the door for the comfort of the keepers and the staff. It is a tropical environment after all, so there's a lot of potential for sudden rains. Um, I was laying in a mulch-ish type path since I don't have anything to keep the guests from walking onto paths that go to keeper areas. Uh, and there are no keepers yet. My idea was to just imply a path at this point, uh, and do a little bit of terrain painting there to trim up that area. So going back to catch that little bit of mulch that was sticking out on the roof led me to add mulch to the bottom of the aviary. So a bit of a jump here. You can see the roof is on, and take a look at the inside before spinning around and checking out the progress so far. The walls in the back are in place, um, and it's time to start thinking about the pathing that's going to be the crossroads at this entrance into the park proper. And a little bit of terraforming is necessary for that, as well as making the various connections that are necessary for it to work out. So here I'm working to connect the two exits from the building, and that will then lead to a path that will go off to the period of the animal that is on that side of the building. So I also need to connect up the front of the building and set up the paths that will go off to either side, which will take you toward the first period of dinosaurs and the last period of dinosaurs, depending on which way the guests choose to go. In this next section, you're going to see me struggling with getting the path to go through this small canyon area. It just kept getting the invalid path thing because it was getting too close to the elevated sections of the terrain. It just upset the, the computer's idea of how much space was needed for the path to go. To my eye, it looked like it fit, but the computer obviously had other ideas. And when it comes to this kind of thing, computer always wins. So this section goes on for a bit before we get to other, perhaps more interesting parts of the structure. Eventually I did manage to get a path through, but even then it takes a big drop on the far end of it, which I subsequently had to fix. So, by pushing the elevated areas back far enough, I was eventually able to get a path to come through there after smoothing it all down. And, it gets a little fussy in these kind of circumstances, but, it could be worse. It's still better than some other ones. Now, the current state of the pathing means it argues when various paths meet. So I decided to put in a plaza to hide that and also act as a plaza from which the various paths would depart. And I wanted to smooth in the path coming into or out of that plaza, so that the guests have a seeming free choice of where to go, and it doesn't look quite so unintended. So there, that kind of works, and now it's time to work on the entrance area to spiff it up a bit, taking walls and setting them in to be curbs, broadening it for the entrance to make it more clear that this is a separation from the path into another space, and adjusting the walls I put in to be long enough to be the curbs for this planting area that I will be putting in shortly. That being able to stretch the various elements is just great for making this an easier job. I really like that. You can see the rocks that block off the spread between the curved wall and the straight wall. And then there's mulch pieces to simulate a sloped planting area where I can put the various small plants in to get a more continuous effect so that the building appears to be settled well into the landscape. I'm playing here with, changing some of the sizes of the plants to make them work. In some cases, using a different plant and doing a lot of fussing to get this looking the way I think it will convey a good impression. Um, so, yeah, there's really not a lot to say about doing this kind of stuff once you've done it several times. I'm using this small plant to make a border because I wanted to keep it simple and clearly, man planted in this area at the entrance, as opposed to the little bit more natural effect I wanted to get on the sides of the building and connecting the the building's plantings to the park, more or less natural plants. So a few epiphytes up here, mostly for their color. We don't have a lot of colorful things just yet, but I did want to keep everything pretty tropical on this structure um, because frankly that would be lower maintenance for the groundskeepers if the plants are in the environment that the park is. Yeah, you can. I'm using low bushes there to cover those extra bits of wall that came through the mulch. Um, it's just easier to do it that way than mess with the heights or having two pieces. So um, this whole top of the building is going to be covered. I want a couple of taller plants out front to help frame it and break up the visual line a little bit. Um, so a lot of the low bushes up here, mostly because they cover space pretty quickly. Um, for some reason, the game was not letting me uh, change the sizes on these guys without uh, going in and out of the various plants. But, minor tribulation. And now a few taller plants to give a little more height to the green roof and have, again, a breakup of the visual outline. Some of that concrete is just so rigid. Uh, it's nice to break it up. And have some bamboo as screening plants. And again, taller, break up that line. I don't want that hard concrete just sitting there in the landscape. I hope to eventually to be able to recolor the concrete and make it look a little more natural. It's so easy these days for concrete to be tinted with earth pigments. It just seems a really good choice to do for this kind of park where it's trying to blend in to the environment where it can and use what would be the natural environment, even though the game gives me a mostly flat area. Uh, I want to have some terrain elevation features in the park. So using the paintbrush for the trees was giving me a little too much density at the setting I had it on. So I had to take out some of them because they were just too close. Um, so we lay in some trees, get a general idea of what this is going to look like, lay in some to make a boundary area in the back. I want to blend and screen this area where the animals are going to be, give them shade, and move on to making it more of an enclosure for them. Uh, I'm going with rocks on this Crossroads area, not just to serve as a barrier for the animals so they can't get out, but also as a visual screen to we're a real park, excuse me. The idea would be to encourage the guests to come into the pavilion and use the viewing window to see the animals as their first opportunity, and then they could choose to come out of the pavilion and see the animals outside. Both of those would offer views to the feeding area, uh, and I mean that's the sort of thing parks like to do. So taking advantage of the wonderful scaling and distortion tools for the rocks, it can make a nice, relatively thin wall and use different rocks to get a different texture while maintaining uh, a relatively uniform height. I'm trying to keep in mind here that the animals in here may be able to move up some of these rocks, so I want it relatively vertical on their side of the enclosure to discourage them from coming over it in the game. And now starting to lay in more plants in order to blend things in front, and then come back to the path side of the enclosure and put in the first fence. This is the actual habitat fence. I want to put in a secondary fence as well. Just notionally getting the feel of it for right now, because I'm not exactly sure where the path is going to come out of this area and go toward the, well, in this case, it'll head toward the Jurassic portion of the park. Um, so fussing with some of the smaller plantings um, at the curved portion of the building there. Got some that didn't land where I really wanted them to, and as it happens a lot with the plant removal tool, you often get more than you want removed. So um, I'm probably going to come back and revisit that area where the path diverges to the Jurassic. But back into the habitat itself, adding rocks to the elevated area to give it a more natural look, and plants to blend the rocks in. You can see I've got elevated terrain off to the back right, which will give a more private area, I hope, for the animal here, and probably where its animal care facilities will be. Um, So, I'm working at this and, trying to decide what I'm going to do and making it up as I go along. And so there's some missteps along the way. I'm trying to achieve now with the painting a lot less grass visible, in the hopes that the grass that is present will end up looking a little bit more like a grass-like plant, since grasses are documented to the Cretaceous, I think, at the moment. These things change. When I first learned about dinosaurs, grasses just were not part of their world, but it turns out they are certainly present, at least in the late Cretaceous. Uh, so, but there are other plants that somewhat imitate the look of grasses, and at the scale this game is done most of the time, you know, using what they call grass for those kind of plants is really not such a bad deal. Uh, so on the other side, I'm doing some terraforming for the other small beginnings animal, giving it a little bit of water, and I'm going to have to dress out that water area both with its terrain painting, since the auto terrain painting for things like water and slopes is not in place yet. And sometimes, particularly in the shallow water, you get that sharp edge you see where the game has trouble with the shadows, because that tree shadow should be clean across the water edge, but it's not. So knowing that that's going to be a problem, I'm putting in uh, water plants to hide that. Uh, these two animals are both fairly small, and I want to make sure they have enough hiding space. Having changed the terrain, the feeder is now kind of hanging in the air, so give it a flat rock underneath it that in theory the animals should be able to get on. I may need to revisit that once I can put the actual animal in there and check what terrain it can traverse. Uh, so putting in a rock near the building as a bit of a transition from the concrete to a solid natural thing before putting the fencing up. And same style fencing for the actual habitat fencing. And then I'm going to do a modular fence for the people fence to keep people from perhaps having their fingers nipped off. Because even herbivores can get cranky, and a lot of the a lot of dinosaurs have the hardware to take fingers off, even if they're not meat eaters. Uh, so as you can see, I changed my mind about which fence to use, uh, and I thought it'd just be better to have something that would prevent children from making it easy to get things to the animals. Didn't like that much. Another nice feature of these games, that last piece where the fence isn't quite long enough, you can stretch it and fill that hole. And that's just great. So I'm going to bracket this section of fence with rocks, also to blend it into the environment and make it a transition from the very formal fencing that is very current era to the more natural, wild type of environment I want to have in this park as the spaces between the exhibits. It's just the thing I'm going for here, and we'll see how it all plays out. Uh, and Rocks, rocks, rocks. So many rocks. You can see how easily the rocks blend with each other, allowing you to make new configurations and get different effects with them. I like that a lot. Uh, you know, it's easy to get some good looks. And I observed that I had kind of an open corner there. The plant was getting lost, but also people could see over the concrete wall very easily into the enclosure, and that was not what I wanted. So I'm going through here, finding those gaps where guests might be able to see into it, or in the case of this one, possibly even the animal getting out through the gap. These are things you don't want in a zoo. Um, so their intention here is to create a rock wall along the path so the guests will be able to hear the animals but can't see them, and that may intrigue those who passed up the pavilion in the first place to possibly go back and check out what's making all the noise. Uh, would certainly happen in the real world, and it adds a little bit of potential allure, the mystery of what animal is making that strange noise. Got to go see kind of stuff. Um, so I wanted to then move on and spiff up the canyon here, now that I finally got the path in, to make it look a little more natural than simply elevating the terrain as I did before this project was set up to go in. And you got to pay attention to the artistic look of things, and you can throw down a ton of rocks and stuff. It'll be a lot of pieces, but the question is, does it look good? And the answer isn't always yes. And I can't claim that I always get it looking real good either, but I try. And I want something a little more than just what the terrain tools will do. So I'm doing rocks to represent the harder edge of that gives us that plateau drop off on this bit of the area, and I want to soften it with plants to make it seem more settled in the landscape. And a few more plants here on this side of the entrance, and then over to the other side to give it a similar treatment. Um, I'm mostly working right here on the plaza area because I'm not entirely sure how I want it to go as the path diverges from this Crossroads Plaza and into the sections of the park. The trail here to the left as you come across the causeway will lead to the Triassic. And I'm probably going to need to start blending my foliage to get it to the drier, more Mediterranean and scrubland type foliage that I plan on using in the two exhibits that will highlight that area. So, more plants in to blend it. This is still obviously not the area yet for the Triassic. And that's about where we're going to end for this one. Give it a like if you did. Subscribe if you want more. See you later.